There's something different about people who grew up in the 1970s. Maybe it's the way they handle chaos without falling apart. Maybe it's how they can sit in complete silence without reaching for their phone. Or maybe it's that quiet confidence that comes from a childhood most parents today would consider borderline neglect. Because the 1970s didn't just shape a generation, it forged a specific type of psychological resilience that experts are only now beginning to understand. And by the end of this, you're going to see exactly why growing up in that decade created some of the most self-reliant people walking the planet today. Let's start with something most people get completely wrong. When we think about raising healthy, well-adjusted children, we assume more supervision equals better outcomes, more structure, more guidance, more protection. But kids of the 1970s prove that theory dead wrong. Think about it. You're 7 years old. Your mom finishes breakfast, looks at you, and says one thing: be home before the streetlights come on. That's it. No GPS tracker on your wrist, no hourly check-ins, no calendar full of organized activities planned by adults who think you need constant enrichment. Just you, the neighborhood, and complete freedom to make your own choices. You leave the house after breakfast and disappear for 8 hours. You spend entire afternoons building forts in the woods with scrap lumber you found behind the hardware store. You create elaborate games with nothing but sticks, rocks, and whatever your imagination can conjure. And when disputes break out, or when arguments erupt over whose turn it is, you work it out yourselves. There is no adult referee coming to settle things. There is just you and your friends, and the understanding that if you cannot figure it out, the game is over and everyone goes home. This wasn't abandonment. This was trust. Neuroscientists have discovered something extraordinary about this kind of childhood. Unstructured play, the kind where children create their own rules and solve their own problems, literally rewires the brain for creativity and complex problem solving. It builds what researchers call executive function, the ability to plan, adapt, make decisions, and think critically without someone telling you what to do next. While modern children have every moment of their day structured by adults, kids who grew up in the 1970s were developing neural pathways for independence. They were learning to think for themselves because no one else was doing it for them. Now imagine you are riding your bike through the neighborhood and you notice something. The Johnson's car is in the driveway at a weird time. Mr. Henderson is outside when he is usually at work. The teenagers from 3 streets over are hanging out at the park. You learned to read situations fast. You knew which neighbor would yell at you for cutting through their yard and which one did not care. You could tell when the older kids were in a mood to let you tag along versus when you should make yourself scarce. You understood which houses were safe to knock on if you needed help and which ones to avoid. This was not paranoia. This was survival intelligence. When you are navigating the world without constant adult supervision, you develop a sixth sense for reading people and situations. You learn to assess risks on your own and to make split-second decisions about safety. You learn to read people's intentions from their body language and tone before they even opened their mouth. What researchers call hypervigilant social awareness sounds clinical, but for you, it was just paying attention. And it made you sharp in ways modern children, whose parents narrate every social interaction and smooth over every conflict, simply are not. Fast forward to 3:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. The school bus drops you off at the corner. You walk up to your house, fish the key out from under the flower pot where it has been sitting for 3 years, and let yourself in. The house is empty. Both parents are at work. You will not see them for another 3 hours. There is no panic, no fear, just the quiet sound of your footsteps on the linoleum and the hum of the refrigerator. You drop your backpack. You make yourself a snack. You turn on the TV and watch whatever is on. You start your homework or you do not. Maybe you call a friend on the landline. Maybe you just sit there thinking. This daily routine, coming home to an empty house and managing the next few hours entirely on your own was not loneliness. It was competence. Every single afternoon, you proved to yourself that you could handle being alone, that you were capable, that you did not need someone hovering over you to survive the next 3 hours. And something got hardwired into these kids during those quiet afternoons. When things went wrong, they did not look around for someone else to blame or fix it. They asked themselves what they could do differently. Psychologists call this an internal locus of control, the belief that your actions directly influence your outcomes, that you have power over your own life. But for 1970s kids, it was not a concept they learned in therapy. It was just reality. You fell off your bike, you got up, you broke something, you figured out how to fix it or how to explain it. This kind of self-reliance does not just run deep, it runs bone deep. But let's talk about those moments when you'd finished your homework, watched your one allocated hour of television, and still had 3 hours stretching out before dinner. You'd wander into the living room where your mom was folding laundry and say those 2 words every parent dreaded. "I'm bored." You know what she'd say back? "Go find something to do." That was it. No phone handed over, no tablet loaded with games, no immediate solution, just you and that restless, itchy feeling of having absolutely nothing to do. So you'd go outside and stare at clouds. You'd reorganize your baseball card collection for the 3rd time that week. You'd call your friend and discover they were bored too. So you'd be bored together until one of you came up with something. You learned that boredom wasn't an emergency requiring immediate treatment. It was just a signal, a little nudge from your brain saying it was ready to create something new. Modern parents treat boredom like a disease, but you sat with it, you let it simmer, and eventually, something always emerged. An idea, a game, a project, something that came from within you rather than being handed to you. This tolerance for discomfort extends far beyond childhood boredom. These are people who can sit in silence without immediately reaching for their phones, who can wait in long lines without losing their minds, who can handle uncertainty because they learned early that not every moment needs to be filled with stimulation or answers. Here's what's interesting. Studies show that people who experienced regular periods of understimulation as children have more active brain regions for creativity, self-reflection, and innovative thinking. Basically, boredom taught your brain how to generate ideas from nothing. While modern brains are trained to consume content, yours was trained to create it. Which brings us to the big oak tree at the end of the street. You know the one, branches thick enough to hold your weight, high enough that the ground looked genuinely small from the top. You climbed trees, high ones, trees where if you fell, you were not bouncing back up with a smile. You rode your bike without a helmet, feeling the wind whip through your hair as you flew down hills, hands off the handlebars because that is what made you cool. You jumped off rope swings into questionable water. You built ramps for your skateboard out of plywood and cinder blocks that were definitely not structurally sound. And yes, sometimes you got hurt. You scraped your knees until they bled. You twisted your ankles. Maybe you broke a bone. But here is what happened. You learned through direct experience what was actually dangerous versus what just looked scary. You developed an internal calibration system for risk. That tall tree? You learned exactly how high you could climb before the branches got too thin to hold you. That bike jump? You knew the difference between a thrilling landing and a trip to the emergency room. This was not recklessness. It was wisdom earned through experience. While other generations might freeze when faced with uncertain situations, kids who grew up in the 1970s learned to assess and adapt. They understood that some risks are worth taking because they lived through the consequences of both caution and boldness. Psychologists call it a calibrated sense of risk. But for you, it was just knowing your limits because you had already tested them. Then came those weekends when all your friends were busy. Saturday morning, no plans, no one available to play, Just you and the entire weekend stretched out ahead. And you know what? That was okay. You could spend hours in your room with your comic books, building elaborate scenarios with your action figures, drawing, reading the same book for the third time because you liked it. You take bike rides alone, explore the neighborhood solo, spend an entire afternoon just thinking. This wasn't isolation. This was contentment with your own company. You learned early that you didn't need constant external validation to feel secure in who you were, that being alone and being lonely were two completely different things. The independence forced on this generation created something unexpected, a deep capacity for solitude that borders on the supernatural. These are people who can spend entire weekends alone and emerge refreshed rather than drained, people who do not need to fill every moment with social interaction or digital connection. What researchers now recognize as crucial for mental health, the ability to self-soothe and to be comfortable in your own head, was just you entertaining yourself on a Saturday afternoon. And it created adults who approach problems differently, handle stress uniquely, and navigate relationships with a specific kind of emotional intelligence that is becoming increasingly rare. But that emotional intelligence was earned in moments you'd least expect. Something happened at school. Maybe someone said something mean in front of everyone. Maybe you failed a test you'd studied for. Maybe you had a fight with your best friend over something stupid. You come home, you go to your room, you lie on your bed staring at the ceiling, and you feel that hot, tight feeling in your chest. Anger, embarrassment, disappointment. But here's the thing. You couldn't immediately text someone about it, couldn't scroll through social media looking for validation, couldn't even call anyone because your mom was on the landline and mobile phones would not exist for another 20 years. So you just sat with it. You stared at the ceiling. Maybe you punched your pillow a few times. You felt the feeling in all its uncomfortable intensity until eventually it passed. This wasn't emotional repression. This was something else entirely. You learned that emotions are temporary visitors, not permanent residents. That you could feel disappointed without it meaning your whole life was falling apart. That you could experience conflict without immediately needing to resolve it or get reassurance from someone else. What psychologists call emotional self-regulation, one of the strongest predictors of success in both personal and professional relationships, was just you sitting alone in your room processing your feelings. Those who grew up in the 1970s do not need constant reassurance because they developed internal mechanisms for managing their emotional states. They learned that feelings pass, that you can survive discomfort, that not every emotion requires immediate action or external intervention. Now let us think about what it felt like to wait. Really wait. You wanted to watch your favorite show, not just any episode, the new one, the one everyone would be talking about on Monday. So all week long, you thought about it. You planned your entire week around making sure you were in front of a television at exactly 7 o'clock on Thursday night. And when that episode ended on a cliffhanger, you waited 7 days to see what happened next. 7 full days of wondering, speculating, imagining what might happen. This rhythm of anticipation and reward was not something your parents taught you, it was just reality. And it created something powerful, the ability to wait for good things, to understand deep in your bones that anticipation makes the payoff sweeter, that some things are worth the wait. Modern brains are wired for instant gratification, immediate answers, instant streaming, next-day delivery, but your brain learned a different pattern. Christmas morning felt magical specifically because you waited 365 days for it. The first day of summer vacation was incredible because you earned it through 9 months of school. That new toy meant something because you had saved your allowance for 3 months to buy it. And here is what researchers have discovered. People who can postpone immediate pleasure for future rewards have lower rates of addiction, higher academic achievement, and more stable relationships. The 1970s generation got this training built into their daily existence without even realizing it. You were not learning delayed gratification. You were just living in a world that moved slower, and it rewired your brain for patience. But not everything came easy, even with patience. Remember the day you fell off your bike, knees bleeding, hands scraped raw. You limp home expecting sympathy. Your parents take one look at you and say you are fine. Get back on. So you did. You lost the neighborhood baseball game. You struck out with the bases loaded. You felt that crushing disappointment. And the next day, you played again. Your science fair volcano did not erupt. Your book report got a C-. You did not make the team. You forgot your lines in the school play. And each time, you felt that sting of failure. But here is what did not happen. There was no committee of adults rushing in to make sure your feelings were not hurt. No participation trophy to ease the blow. No grade inflation to protect your self-esteem. You failed, you felt bad about it, and then you figured out what to do differently next time. This was not cruelty. It was your brain building resilience. While other generations might spiral into self-doubt after professional rejection or relationship problems, kids from the 1970s have this internal voice that says, okay, what did I learn from this? They treat failure as feedback rather than identity, because they learned young that falling down does not define you. Getting back up does. And you needed that resilience when navigating the complex social world of childhood friendships. Picture the park on a summer afternoon. No adult is refereeing your friendships. When someone said they would meet you at the park and did not show up, you had to figure out if they forgot, if they were mad at you, or if something came up. When two friends were fighting and you were caught in the middle, you had to navigate that minefield yourself. When someone's feelings got hurt during a game, you had to figure out how to make it right without a teacher stepping in to mediate. This forced you to become a student of human behavior. You learned to read micro-expressions, that little tightness around someone's eyes that meant they were upset even if they said they were fine. You could sense tension in a group before others even noticed something was wrong. You understood that what people said and what they meant were not always the same thing. You knew which friend you could joke around with and which one took everything personally. You understood group dynamics. Who was the natural leader? Who was the peacemaker? Who would go along with anything? You learned when to push back and when to let things go, when to apologize and when to stand your ground. People assume that less supervised childhoods created antisocial or emotionally distant adults. It is actually the opposite. These kids had to develop incredibly sophisticated social skills because they were navigating complex peer relationships without adult referees. They learned to read tone, interpret subtext, and understand that most communication happens below the surface level of actual words. And now, decades later, many of these people who grew up in the 1970s are standing in their own kitchens, watching their own children struggle with something. Maybe it is a difficult homework problem. Maybe it's a friendship issue, and they feel the instinct to jump in, to fix it, to smooth it over. But they don't. They give their children space to make mistakes, not because they do not care, but because they understand something fundamental. Overprotection creates anxiety rather than safety. They know that children need to experience manageable risks to develop genuine confidence. They can watch their kids struggle and resist the urge to immediately jump in and fix it. When their child fails, they do not rush to blame the teacher or the system. They ask, what do you think you could do differently next time? Because that is the question they learned to ask themselves. They prioritize competence over comfort. They believe temporary discomfort leads to long-term strength. Struggle builds character, and independence creates security. These are not just philosophical beliefs read in a parenting book. They are neural pathways carved deep through lived experience. These individuals carry within them something becoming increasingly rare in our hyper-connected, overstimulated world. A quiet confidence comes from knowing you can handle whatever life throws at you. Their brains were literally rewired by freedom, strengthened by boredom, and calibrated by risk. They are living proof that maybe we have overcomplicated the whole business of raising resilient human beings. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is not protection from struggle, but the tools to navigate it independently.